It is time to change things up just a bit. We've put together a few fairly expensive builds in Q4 2020. Figured we'd throw together a fairly affordable budget system that's gonna pack a heck of a punch. You can see just at first glance here, this will be a pretty sweet 1080p and like 1440p gamer, and it's gonna cost well under $1,000 if you play your cards right and buy used. Let's get started. So to start things off, we've got an AMD Ryzen 5 2600. These are going for around $100, maybe a bit more than that. I know the markets, especially elsewhere, like I'm talking elsewhere, not the United States, but other countries, can be pretty screwed up. But if you can find one of these for about 100 or 120 bucks, including the stock Wraith cooler, which is gonna save us some money on the cooling side of things, then buy it if you're in the market for a budget system. The Ryzen 5 2600, 6 cores, 12 threads, pretty decent boost clock. It's gonna be XMP friendly, so most kits of RAM should work with this natively. And best of all, you get to pair it with a fairly cheap B450 motherboard. This is a tough gaming B450 Plus. Not the cheapest you could buy. You could buy like a PCmate B350 and update the BIOS. That'd be even cheaper. But this has nice subtle yellow accents, and that's gonna look nice with our kit of RAM. Oloy Warhawk DDR4 modules. We reviewed these specifically in this video somewhere up here if you want to check those out. But yeah, they look cool-ish, maybe in the right build, and you have yellow accents, and they're fairly cheap, about 50 bucks for a 16 gig kit. Cache latency 16, 3000 megahertz. We confirm these will overclock to 3200 megahertz. All right, now, the used graphics card. GTX 1080. These are going for around 300 bucks still. If you can get lucky, find one for about 250 to 260. That I think is a more fair price when seen in light of the new NVIDIA offerings from Ampere, which have kind of pushed all of the previous graphics card prices down a bit. Now, of course, again, the markets are kind of screwed up right now. But even if you can find one of these for about 260 to 280, and it's a decent AIB. This one's kind of just a reference board, but still, it is worth considering in this price range. A 1080 is still a great card in late 2020, early 2021. Now for storage, we've gone with a 1 terabyte Team Group NVMe SSD. We don't need anything Gen 4 speed because this motherboard, the CPU don't support Gen 4 PCI Express. So sticking with Gen 3 is good, not only from like a performance level, you know, NVMe drives are among the fastest drives out there, but also we don't need to spend extra. We don't feel inclined to spend any more for a PCI Gen 4 drive because we're not going to see Gen 4 speeds. So that's why a 1 terabyte will do. 1 terabyte's a great starting point. NVMe drives nowadays are super cheap. Probably want to buy this new just because, yeah, you don't know what's been on some of these used drives on eBay. And the last two components, the power supply. First off, this is a 600 watt EVGA. It's just an 80 plus white. It's not like 80 plus gold or bronze even, but it is good enough for a lot of the budget entry-level systems out there. You can buy these used, although I recommend buying new just because the price, like the price difference between the used and new power supplies out there usually aren't too great, and you don't know what kinds of loads the used power supplies on the market have experienced. So I recommend just buying new. You can find 500-600 watts from EVGA and the like for about 50 bucks or so. Last, we've got the case, Fractal Design Meshify C. What more do I need to say about this? This was actually new on Newegg recently for about 59, 60 bucks, somewhere in that range, which is incredible for a case of this good. I mean, if you're in the market for one, mid-tower, you kind of gotta buy it. And there is one more thing to consider, especially in a budget build. That's an operating system. Windows 10 Pro licenses from our sponsor VIPSD can be purchased for under $20. Use our discount code GSL and you can get it for around 15 bucks. It makes absolutely no sense to spend 100 or more US dollars on a retail key in a $600, $700, $800 build. It just doesn't make any sense. So check out our sponsor link below where you can get that Windows 10 Pro key for, again, dirt cheap. It's an OEM key. It'll lock to the hardware specifically with which it's activated, but I don't know many people swapping out motherboards every other week. In worst case, just buy another one for another 15 bucks, not a huge deal. So we're gonna show you how to install the operating system at the end of the video, but for now, I'm gonna show you how to assemble all this stuff into a fully functional build. Alrighty, I was really hoping that this board was the one in this box. I try to keep these organized, but I've got a few, and sometimes I like to share boxes. So I think for, yep, if I recall, for these Wraith coolers, we need to remove these brackets. Screwdriver time. Let's get these out of here. All right, so we want to keep the back plate. It's nice that these AM4 boards come with the back plate because a lot of coolers use this. You don't need to install a back plate like a lot of the Intel systems out there. I think LGA 2011 is an exception. But this here is our Ryzen 5 2600. Now this has seen it's experienced, right? It's been in several systems to date. I think this, I don't know, I've had this for maybe like 2 or 3 years now, but fairly simple to install here. You're gonna pull back on this lever, and then we're going to align this little golden triangle here. There's a tiny little triangle next to the socket. So we're just gonna drop the CPU in like so. It'll really only situate itself one way in here. And then we're gonna pull back down on the retention lever until it clips in. All right, now I'm not sure if this cooler's been used before. It has, because there's no stock thermal paste on there. Not to worry, we've got some thermal compound somewhere in here. Okay, so I've actually got the spreading tool, and I've already on here. This might be a bit too much for this CPU, but I'm gonna go ahead and manually spread this, just so we're sure that thermal paste is everywhere it needs to be. The answer to that is pretty much the entire IHS, because the IHS is soaking up all of the heat generated by the die underneath. And we're just going to apply the cooler like so. Make sure that those threads are aligned. And here comes the cringy part. You gotta push a little hard on this cooler here to get these threads to catch. Some of these coolers, yep, like this one here, it's just making a god-awful sound. Bit. And that one's good. So look, folks, at the end of the day, this is not going to be the best cooler for your CPU of choice, but it's an affordable option, and it's one that actually works pretty darn good considering how small it is. So if you're a baller on a budget, using the stock AMD cooler in Zen, Zen Plus, Zen 2 chips, it's going to be fine, okay? Just chill. And we're going to connect the fan cable to the header labeled CPU fan. Piece of cake. Some motherboards won't boot past the BIOS load screen unless you have a fan connected to that first header. You can, of course, bypass that in the BIOS, but a lot of people freak out when they see that. So I always try to throw it into the CPU fan header if possible. All right, so we're good there. Now we need to install a RAM. It's pretty straightforward. So the board itself actually denotes, Kyle, if you want to show them what this looks like here. It's gonna look a bit different from board to board. Some boards won't even have this, you have to look in the manual. But you see where slots A2 and B2 are starred, there's a little asterisk behind them. So that's this slot and this slot. They're actually slightly lighter shade of black there. We're just gonna align the notch on the DIMM with the notch in the slot. Push down until you hear clicks on both sides of each slot. Boom, there you go. You have to push a little hard here. Some people freak out. They think, oh, I'm gonna break my board, I'm gonna break my RAM, but they're pretty tight tolerances here. That's why people tend to freak out a bit. You're okay. So, I mean, like, the colors sort of kind of match. I think this is about as close as we're gonna get with these gold accents and this alloy RAM and these kind of oranges. Well, I don't know, maybe like it's a yellow. What color is that, Kyle? Yellow or orange? It's like a weird in between, but I mean, it's not bad. From a few feet away, it'll look like they kind of sort of work, maybe. When it comes to M.2 installation, there could be 1 key or 2 keys. This is an NVMe drive. Most of these are going to be 1 key. You can see it pretty much lines up verbatim. That slot there, push it all the way in, like so, and then we're gonna pull it back. Use that small little screw there. Let's see, this one here, to lock it in place. This part is a lot easier with a magnetic screwdriver. I've seen on forums, there's some crap floating around that like magnetic screwdrivers are bad for your system. You could like destroy something. I mean, these magnets are super weak. You would need a very strong magnet to screw up anything on those boards. So don't be afraid to use one. It will keep those screws, especially the small screws for the NVMe drives, from kind of falling around and getting stuck in places they shouldn't. All right, and next up, we need to mate the motherboard to the chassis. Again, in this case, it's our Meshify C here. Slight tinted glass, looks pretty darn good. We're gonna lay the case down, right side down, I should say, and we're going to install our rear IO shield first, assuming one is not already pre-installed at the back of our motherboard. If one is not pre-installed, you'll have a bunch of gaps in here. That's when you know to look in your motherboard's box for that IO shield. So this is what this board's particular rear IO shield looks like. It's just a kind of a chrome shiny piece of thin metal. And the way to know how to orient this, right, you're gonna see these 3 holes, could be 6 holes depending on what kind of audio solution you have on your motherboard. That's how you know which way to orient this. So you're going to insert it from the inside be careful. These things don't look like much, but they are freaking sharp. They'll slice a finger off in the right setting. And that's kind of an over-exaggeration, but you know what I mean. They're gonna clip it on all 4 corners. That's how you know this thing is in there. Now, once it's in there, grab your motherboard by the cooler. If you have an AIO and you haven't installed that yet, maybe you can grab it by the edges, but the cooler is a surefire way, assuming you've installed it correctly. We're gonna pick up the motherboard, swing it into the case. There's gonna be a central standoff. I like to reference this. This one actually has one that you don't even need to thread through. So it'll kind of poke through the board. And that's how we know that our motherboard is where it should be. The other holes here, the threads align, the holes on the board. And we can also check the back and see that all of our ports align with the rear I/O shield we just installed. Looking good. Now we need to screw it down. And getting these last few screws in here. Let's see. Got one up here. Kyle, I fully expect you'll get this shot. Yeah? he's panicking a bit, folks. Panicking a bit. All right, so we're good. We can flip the case upright and admire our work so far. How does it look, Kyle? Looking pretty good?
Solid.
Now at this point, I like to do a bit of the cable managing, the wiring, especially these small wires like the front I/O wires. These are very small and things can get a bit cluttered once we install our power supply. So yeah, that's why I take care of these first, just keeps these out of the way. And we've got a few holes under the basement here. This is where we're gonna thread some of these cables through. I apologize, this is more or less the most boring aspect of PC building, the frickin' wiring. Like, ow! So HD audio is typically gonna come all the way over here toward the rear of the case. Now this right here is the USB 3 header. That on this board is at the bottom. I'm gonna connect this cable to this fan header here. Okay, so both fans are connected. We're just gonna stick with the 2 stock fans. Good enough. We have one intake fan, more or less directed at the graphics card, but again, the air will kind of find its way out of the other crevices in this case. And there's a lot of filtration too in the Mesh 5C, which is fine. And we have one exhaust fan. These are both 120s. The exhaust fan will get rid of a lot of the heat generated by both the graphics card and the CPU. All right, now the 600 watt power supply has been through a lot. I've used this particular unit multiple times. But it's nothing pretty, right? But at the end of the day, you shouldn't really prioritize aesthetics over performance in a budget build, especially a build that's gonna cost between $600 and $800. We're gonna slide them in through the rear. Make sure they all come through. Got a few stragglers. It'll be a bit messy at first. Try to get them to come out here through the back side. Slide the power supply in. Just these 2 thumb screws. We're gonna lock things in place. We've got 8-pin EPS. Some power supplies will just have this split between 2 4-pins. It'll typically be labeled CPU or EPS. We're gonna connect that into this 8-pin header at the top left of the motherboard, north of the socket. But there we go. All right, that's installed. Yeah, you've got the kind of ugly ketchup and mustard cables, but you know what? Again, in this price range, not a huge deal. It's gonna pack a heck of a punch for the price. Now you see we've got a cluster of SATA and Molex connectors here. We don't have any external drives. We don't have any RGB LED strips, any RGB fans, any of that. So we don't need to connect any of these to anything in the system. And that's one of the advantages of having just an NVMe drive. It's powered directly by the main board. So we're gonna tuck these in, we're gonna install the graphics card, and we'll pretty much be done with the hardware side of this build. Now you want to remove the rear PCIe slot covers and the 2 thumb screws that correspond to those that line up with this uppermost 16-lane PCIe slot. That's where we're going to install our graphics card. Now we do have one extra slot above that, but in this case, like the motherboard doesn't have a slot that high. The graphics card here, again, our GTX 1080. Oh, wait, that says 1070. Whoops. You know what? We're just gonna roll with it. 1070 is still plenty for this build. Obviously the 1080 would be better, but this actually keeps costs down a bit more. And 1070 is gonna be fairly quiet under load, not gonna get fairly loud. And this is a beautiful card. I mean, this is basically the exact same board, everything as the 1080 counterpart. Actually the same GPU as well. It's just some cores in there have been deactivated. They don't pass the mark, and that's just what you get with binning. Now, We're gonna slide this in. See that uppermost 16-lane slot? Pull back on this little retention arm here for that 16-lane slot, and there we go. Clip her in. Now this power supply is a daisy-chained pair of 8 pins for PCI supplemental power. We just need one. It's okay to leave the other disconnected. We're gonna connect this, slide it all the way and make sure it's all the way there, connected to the card. We'll just kind of tuck this extra 8 pin underneath. Again, no problem leaving this disconnected. And at this point, all we're doing is cable managing. Fairly subjective how much or how little of this you want to do. The Meshify C makes it fairly easy. So if the back of your Meshify C doesn't look very good and you have like, you know, you're only using like one storage drive, no LEDs or anything like that, you're just being a bit lazy, my friend. I hate to say it because it's super easy to keep things looking at least somewhat organized here. That's literally all it takes. Now this, unfortunately, this USB 3.0 header, or the cable, is a little too short, and the placement of the header on the board just makes it to where we have no choice but to stretch the cable across here. And we could use a zip tie to keep this 8-pin cable tucked away a bit better. But there you go. I mean, very minimal effort, and things look pretty darn good. Again, for a budget system with, yeah, pretty mediocre cables. And the way you know that you've properly cable managed, unless your case just has awful clearance behind the motherboard tray, how easy this right side panel slides on. Look at that, folks. I could have done this with one hand. It's just a piece of cake. Slides in and out, no problem. Secure it with these captive thumb screws. And there we are, folks. Oh, that sounded awful. Swing this build back around. Yeah, it looks a bit dumb with this extra 8-pin hanging here, but again, aesthetics aside, this is gonna pack a punch. Even though we kind of demoted ourselves unintentionally to a 1070, this is still a build that will crush 1080p most games out there, except for maybe a few of the very modern titles. This might not be the best cyberpunk build out there in the 1080p resolution, but again, for the price, it's gonna go a long way. Now, since we talked about the 1080 on the used market, we should also talk a bit about the 1070, which is actually in this build. You can get these on eBay, 1070s, not 1080s, for about 200 bucks today. Now, a year or two ago, I would have said that was a great deal. That's a great bargain. Problem is, there's a lot of new stuff out there now competing with it. The 1660 Ti, the 1660 Super, pretty much trades blows with the 1070 new for a little over $200. So you shouldn't pay more than $200 for a 1070 in 2020 or 2021. That's my take on it. In fact, I think that the optimum price, like something that's not gonna be, you know, a ripoff for either the seller or the buyer, is gonna be around 160 to at the most 180 bucks. $200 is like the tip of the iceberg if you have a premium AIB like an Asus Strix card. Now we're gonna install the left side panel here. This is just a tempered glass panel, and we've got 4 thumb screws to hold it all together. What do you think, Kyle? Doesn't look too bad.
Pretty clean.
I need to break down the prices here. I actually haven't done that. We're gonna see what we could build this for right now on eBay. We're gonna include shipping and the like. I'm thinking somewhere around $700. Like $800 tops. But if you had to pay more than $800 for this system right now, I'd say you could probably do just as good, if not better, new. And at that point, I mean, new, you get the full warranty, and you get peace of mind as well. So we're gonna fire this thing up and then run a few tests. Then we'll go onto eBay and just kind of be like our sanity check, make sure that we're not overpaying for this. I know eBay's pretty whack right now, but just in my head, I have an ideal price for this. We'll see if that actually holds true or not. All right, so we're gonna ensure that this is switched to the on position. This is the power supply at the rear. And if we've wired things up correctly, we push this power button, things should turn on. Good so far. We've got our little portable monitor there wired up, so we should get a post momentarily. It'll be pretty embarrassing if it doesn't. There we go. There we go. That's a post, folks. Now at this point, you need an operating system. Most of you will choose Windows, and we just released a video detailing step-by-step how to install Windows 10 on your latest machine. All you need is a thumb drive like this, an internet connection, and potentially another system. Although if you already have the boot tool created, you don't need to recreate it for each subsequent install. You can take this drive from system to system and install Windows every single time without issues. So I invite you guys to check out this video here if you are new to the Windows installation process system. Again, I'm not going to detail it in this video just because it doesn't make sense to go through the exact same thing I just talked about in a dedicated video. So check that one out. It's also going to be linked below. But from there, once you boot it into Windows, the next thing you'll want to do is activate Windows. Now at this point, nothing's stopping you from going to Newegg or Amazon and buying a retail key for $100, $120, even $200. It can get fairly expensive. But as I said earlier, this in my eyes makes no sense to spend 1/5, 1/6, or 1/7 of your total budget, or allocate 1/7 of that total budget to the operating system that you could otherwise use for free. Microsoft lets you use Windows 10 for free without activating at all. You just have to deal with a watermark. You sometimes can't change your background, your wallpaper, and there are a few other very niche things usually that you won't have access to with an unactivated copy. And this is why I promote the use of OEM keys. It doesn't make any sense to spend that much on a retail key when at the end of the day, all you're really doing is removing that watermark. $15 using our offer code GSL will get you an OEM Pro key for Windows 10 from our sponsor VIP SCD key. From there, it's pretty straightforward. Just hop into System Settings, click on the Update and Security button, scroll down to the Activation tab, and enter your Windows 10 Pro key here. And voila, it's literally that simple, and no watermark. And as we said in our previous build video, I use TimeSpy to more or less kind of gauge where the system stacks up against other submitted results. This obviously is not like, it's not testament, okay? It's not the only benchmark you could run to show how powerful a system is. In fact, in some scenarios, this system will be better than those that beat us in TimeSpy. But for this particular synthetic benchmark, we scored 6,065. It's better than 43% of all submitted results. Now, you're thinking, well, that's less than half. Like, that's below the middle of the scores that are submitted. That's not really that great. Well, when you consider the price, it's not too bad. And check this out. We actually reviewed this laptop just recently. This is the Asus Zephyrus M15, which you can check out reviewed up in this card here. This has a 1660 Ti in it, which is about as good as a GTX 1070, and an Intel Core i7-10750H. Okay, so that 6-core, 12-thread CPU is actually pretty close to this thing, the Ryzen 5 2600. Granted, this is, on the mobile side, going to be a bit more thermally limited, but the scores are very similar. I believe this laptop placed almost identically, actually scored almost exactly the same score as well. This costs $1,300. This costs a lot less. Benefit of going with a mid-tower instead of something like this, which is obviously portable. You're paying a bit more for that portability, but in terms of performance, this is a much better value on the used market. And the last thing to do then is price everything out in the build, kind of ballpark what it would cost you if you were patient and use sites like eBay for at least the major components. So I went through, I found some previously sold listings. They're actually sold today, most of these, like for example, this Ryzen 5 2600, same that's in there, sold for $125 plus $10 shipping. I didn't include shipping. We'll probably have like a $30, $40 buffer all in for those components. The case we bought straight from Newegg new because it was so cheap to begin with. There's a $9 shipping charge there. That would be the most expensive thing. Everything else is going to be pretty cheap. So $125 for the Ryzen 5 2600, and then I found a B450F ROG Strix motherboard sold for $89 and included free shipping. Now it says please read and see photo for actual condition, but it actually, according to the seller, works. There were a few decent boards like this selling for under $100, which I'm kind of surprised by. Most motherboards tend to be listed fairly close to MSRP, even used. The EVGA GTX 1070 SC that we used in our build, this is pretty much the same one, except I don't think this one comes with a back plate. It sold for $170 and then a $12 shipping charge there. So pretty good. Now we already mentioned the Meshify C, but it is still being sold by Newegg directly for $69.99, which I think is a really great price for a mid-tower like this. It has excellent airflow, great cable management. The storage drive, we went with that Team Group MP33 1TB NVMe. The reads and writes there about 1,800 megabytes per second and 1,500 megabytes per second, respectively. A $90 price tag for this kind of drive, though. It's a really good value for especially a budget build if you want to avoid hard drives, and I would try to avoid hard drives at least for the operating system. Sure, a SATA SSD will be fine, but you're going to get 3 times, sometimes in this case up to 4 times faster reads and writes than comparable SATA M.2s or SATA 2.5-inch drives. So consider this one. It's also linked below. And then lastly, the EVGA 500 watt 80 plus white power supply. 500 watts is enough for this system. Just It's okay, trust me, I've been doing this a long time. 500 watts just gives you plenty of leadway there. The 2600 is going to sip on power. The 1070 is a very efficient Pascal counterpart. 500 watts is just right in that sweet spot there. And you're only going to pay about 49 bucks for it. So under $50 for a solid power supply that I've used many, many times. Haven't had a single issue with any of them yet. And the fans actually run fairly quiet even while that power supply is being stressed a bit. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, the Oloy kit. I forgot about the Oloy kit. I don't have it up here, but I did include it in the total price breakdown. You can get those on Newegg for in the mid-50s. I've noticed they went up a bit in price since we made our video about them. But a 16 gig kit, CL16 3000 megahertz, which is pretty good for Zen Plus. Gonna run you about 52 bucks. And that brings the total price for the system to just under $700 when you factor in shipping. So without shipping, about 660 bucks. Shouldn't pay more than about $40 all in for these components when they're shipped. So about $700 total. That ain't bad. That also includes the Windows 10 Pro OEM key for 15 bucks, by the way. I'm not forgetting the activation key. So I think for $700, this is a pretty sweet system. I've linked all the parts, including some of our eBay affiliate links down below if you want to try your look at some bids, maybe find some decent buy it now options. A lot of people are saying, Greg, why are you building systems like this when they're perfectly fine, perfectly suited Ampere and RDNA 2 cards out there? Well, first off, those are different budgets entirely. It'd be very difficult to justify a $400 or $500 graphics card in a $700 system. And for two, just because you can afford something doesn't mean someone else can afford the same. We all live differently. We all live within our own means. We spend money on different things. And some people are perfectly fine buying a value-based system like this. And look, one of the great things about a system like this, not many people talk about this, is the resale value. A bit like buying a used car, a car that's already depreciated, especially if it's a reliable car. These PCs for the most part will last 4 years. Yes, even the used ones, you can get a lot of your money back once you turn this thing around and resell it a year or two later. And I mean, think about it. This has already taken a huge depreciation hit because of Ampere, because of Zen 3. And what's funny is those things, you can't even really buy them right now. In some countries you can, but they're marked up to, Jesus, like, 2-3 times MSRP. And in countries like the US, you don't even have access to them unless you want to, again, buy from a scalper on eBay, or maybe you're one of the very few who is lucky and finds one in stock for a split second on Newegg. But look, there's plenty of value to be found in this price range here in $700, especially if you buy used, at least some of the components. I mean, look, not all of the components in here are used. Some of them were purchased new, but blending them together, new and used hardware, making them work, building a balanced system like this for especially 1080p, which is still a sweet spot for a vast majority of gamers out there, according to Steam surveys. There's nothing wrong with that. We shouldn't shame people for trying to maximize value, maximize the potential that their dollar has. So yeah, I hope you guys have liked this one. Hope you enjoyed the build process, and stay tuned for something a bit different coming up here in a few weeks. It's gonna be probably right after Christmas, but I'm really excited. It's a big project, and yeah, I'm amped for it. All right, give this video a thumbs up if you thought it was cool. Click the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for building with me.